Welcome to Great Northern Cascade Division and Scale. My name's Ian. Made quite a bit of progress over the last week or so. In the last video I had kind of come around the curve of the peninsula here and then all the way down on what will be Interbay Yard, getting all of that plywood sub-road bed in place. In this video I've got all of the sub-road bed, all of that woodland scenic foam track bed, again all the way around from the Seattle stations around this peninsula all the way down the far end, where I'm then going to come out of Interbay Yard and get across to Salmon Bay Bridge. Also then got a bunch of track rounds, so we can go from Seattle stations all the way around the turnover crossovers as we go into Bay Yard. Also did some super elevation on those curves as we came around. It's very subtle, maybe it's too subtle, we'll see when we get to it in the video, but I do like the effect. I didn't want it to be too much. This would have been 1950s Great Northern kind of time, so they wouldn't have had an awful lot of elevation on the track. The trains would not have been running at the brand new Amtrak Acela kind of high speed trains, so I didn't want to have a ton of camber on the track, so maybe I'll go a little bit more camber if I do some more curves like this, but otherwise I'm happy with the effect. I'm happy with the process going through. So this is a little bit of a long video to kind of go through, because like I said, I did all of the sub-road bed, I then did a bunch of the wiring, I got the track cut, I then did the super elevation. So this one does get a little bit long, but let's check it out and see what we think. I need to order more track, I need to order more rail joiners so that I can do the two main lines that go all the way down the 24 feet down this Interbay Yard section to get down towards Salmon Bay Bridge. I am actually going out to Japan in about a week or so. It was my birthday this last week. It was one of those big ones that has a 0 on the end of it, and so I've always wanted to go out to Japan, and I thought, well, now's as good a time as I need to go. So yes, I'm going to check out the Kato headquarters. They've got like a showroom and some big layouts, and unfortunately they have a store with a whole bunch of stuff that I'm going to spend too much money on, but there's also a train museum in Kyoto and all kinds of stuff like that. Going to get to ride the bullet train, check that out. I've already got reservations in the green car on the Nozomi Express service and stuff like that, so I'm going to try and do a bunch of videos as I go out there and kind of travel around by train. So there might not be a lot of progress on the layout over the next 2 or 3 weeks, just because I'm now kind of switching and trying to get ready for that, and then being gone for a week or so and then recovering from being gone. But hopefully you enjoy this one, hopefully you enjoy some of the upcoming Japan train videos, and and once we get into the end of October, hopefully we can get a little bit more progress here on the layout. So thanks for watching. Please do like, subscribe, and follow along, get the notification bell thing so you can see when I am back making more progress, or when I've got all these crazy Japanese videos. And if you've got any tips on traveling by train in Japan, let me know. As much as I've done a bunch of research over the last few years, I'm sure it's going to be as overwhelming as it will be cool, as it will be exciting, as it will be scary, and all that kind of stuff. So we'll be back again soon. Thanks for watching. Bye. So at the end of the last video on part 1, I had all of the tops in place, ready to go. They'd all been raised up on these little risers, 1x3 risers. Everything was level all the way down to the end here. Did come through and hit it with a random orbital sander just to kind of smooth it down, so it's a whole lot better now. And I have then, maybe it's kind of hard to see, started to mark out kind of as we come around these curves where the edge of the track is going to be. It's set back about 2 inches. Edge of the track is set back 2 inches, and so the center's a little over 2 inches, and then it's 1 1/4, 1.5 inch gap, a little bit broader as you would come around the radius on the curves, but it is set back a little way, and part of that is so that I can get the scenery down for where the bridge, the tunnel, sorry, is going to be. And then once you would come out of the tunnel again, I want it set back a couple of inches from the edge of the baseboard, just so that as people are walking around, if their hands do go up, they're not going to bump into it and hit a train that's right there. They're set back a little bit. So I've put marks kind of at various points along just to get me that 2-inch line, and to try and bring this radius curve around. And I don't know how well it's going to show up. This is functionally what it's going to be. I didn't bother actually extending the bench work there. I just measured it out and popped this part out. But that's functionally what we're going to do. We've already got the tracks pretty much joined together up to around here. It's just not shown on the track plan. And so then swinging around about a 23-inch radius, I think. Broadens out about 24-inch radius here, I think. Something like that, and then straight through a couple of turnouts in here that I need to get yet. But let's try and start work on getting the sub-road bed in place to come around the corner and kind of bring us to right around the edge here, maybe a little bit further along by the roundhouse, right around to where we're going to need to get those turnouts in place. This is now with 2 tracks laid down, or the sub-road bed anyway. It's the Woodland Scenic Foam track bed, something that I've used on all the rest of the layout. So I'll bring the 2 lanes together as they kind of were at the end of the stations there. A little bit more gap maybe than necessary. There's probably is about an inch between the foam track bed, which gives track clearance probably is closer to 1 3/4 inches. But you need to bear in mind that I'm going to have long passenger cars that are coming around here. Even though the radius of the curve is very broad, there will be just a little bit of overhang probably, and so I want to make sure that in the event that we had passenger trains traveling in opposite directions with those long passenger cars, and you do have that little bit of overlap, there isn't going to be any problems and they aren't going to bump into each other, especially since this is going to be under a tunnel, or going through a tunnel rather. And if you're going to have derailments on a layout, they are going to be in the most inaccessible of places. So anything that we can do to give a little bit more track spacing here, make sure that that'll flow smoothly, great. And so then sweep around over onto the other side, coming out of the tunnel probably around here. So I think this ended up 22-inch radius on the outside, it's about 21 on the inside, and then coming out to here it was a 24-inch radius. I think it was about 23-inch radius on the inside. So very nice big broad curves. Not perfectly tacked down there, it's a little bit wobbly, but otherwise running fine. And then start to then bend out a little bit so that we have that 2 inches of clearance from the front of the bench work, and then they'll go straight down for about 16 to 18 feet at that point before they then start to bend back in right near the end. So I'm gonna sit on this for a few minutes and just kind of think it through and make sure that this is how I want it. This is the radius that I want it. Is a little bit of a straight line there, even though the track mostly keeps on curving all the way around, just as we transition from that 20 throughout 24-inch radius. And this is also why I made this plywood sub-road bed section a little bit deeper. If you'd watched the previous video, you might have wondered why was it so deep, and it's to make sure that you have the radius of the curve, just because of the way it you know, I like somewhat flowing curves as much as I also want some straight lines. And so just as the trains would have been coming out of the stations, there is those gently flowing curves to bring them together. And then need to swing it out a little bit to get to the peninsula and then get around. So that's why this is a little bit deeper, but it does give plenty of room to then have the front of the tunnel where the hill would be coming down from downtown Seattle. And here it gets a little bit tight, so I need to figure out, probably raise up the fascia a little bit just to help cover that. And then again, I think we're fine here because we're back out into the open, no scenery on the front here. So it's really just to about here where it's going to be a little bit interesting. The rest of this is all going to be open. And then again, you just want to bend it away. So we've got a little bit flowing curves coming away into straight sections. And then along here, this is where we get much closer track spacing. We'll be at about 1 1/4 probably center to center on the tracks. Maybe it's 1 1/2 center to center on the tracks, which is much more close to prototypical running. But I do want to double check the math on that and see if that's going to be adequate spacing. Or prototypical spacing rather. I think about 1 1/4 to 1 1/2 is going to be okay. And then when we run down the front again, we'll maintain that tighter clearance between the tracks, as opposed to this kind of 1 inch, 1 1/2 inch spacing over 1 1/2, 1 3/4 inch spacing maybe, as we've got coming through the big curves through the tunnel. So yeah, think on this one for a few minutes, double check my math on the center to center track spacing, and then we'll start to glue down all this sub-foam road bed, because I am completely out of track pins, and those little push pins are a little bit hard to get in place. Alright, so there's been a little bit of thinking, a little bit of double checking, a little bit of math, and I think what I'll end up doing when I glue down the track is that inside track will shuffle along just a little bit. Right now I'm at almost 2 inches center to center, about 1 3/4 to 1 7/8 center to center. Even in N-track standard, for anything under 24-inch radius curve, they say about 1 1/2 inch center to center. So I do want to play it safe, but this is also almost HO spacing. So I think what I can do is move that inner track a little bit further out. I will change the radius a little bit, but that's fine. And then coming down here, start to pin in some track work to figure out how the turnouts are going to be. So switch down to number 7 turnouts as we come into the yard. It's really not going to get used a whole lot. The whole reason for the turnout here and why we're not doing a double crossover, let's kind of think that one through, is that this back line is going to be the line that comes out of King Street Station, so that's fine. That'll be the line that I would want to have then run off for the main line, and this near side track is the one that comes out of Union Station. I don't want to have crossovers on the other side, on the actual station side before you come to the tunnel, because there wouldn't have been crossovers there. Excuse me, got something in my throat. There wouldn't have been crossovers there, even though I could put them in rule number 1. I didn't want to try and cram in crossovers over there. So you would come through and then you would cross over if you are wanting to either get into the yard or if you just wanted to get onto the main line going eastbound. And then there'll be another crossover way the other side of the bridge. So the crew is going to have to think through how it would be, but in the prototype, that's kind of also how they would have to do it. They wouldn't put in crossovers unless they could avoid them. Prototype would try and minimize the amount of complicated track work that costs money. That is then additional equipment that has to go in, switch machines, switch heaters as well, probably out in the Pacific Northwest. There's a whole bunch of different things that go into it, so they would want to minimize the amount of kind of complex track work and things like that. So not going for a full crossover, but I think this is how it would be. So anyway, number 7s, because I don't necessarily need the long number 10s like I do in the stations. The passenger trains aren't going to go through this a lot. When they do, they would go through slower speed. It would mostly be to move locos in and out. So let's say a loco had come in and it's then going to drop its cars in Union Station, and then the locos themselves are going to come in and do some servicing. Then when they're ready, they would go back out. So a full 12 car train, highly unlikely to ever traverse through this. It is possible, and so I could have thought, okay, future-proof myself, make them number 10s. Number 7s will work fine. They won't be quite as smooth and broad as it is on the platform sides, the throats coming in and out of the station, but they'll work just fine here. Not going to drop down to number 5s anyway. Even in the yard, it'll be number 7s. There will be a number 10, I somewhat tell a lie, on the far side, because that will be the main line. The diverging route will be the main line, essentially, just because of the way that I'm going to be entering into the yard on that technically the north side. So that is a number 10, because there would be the long passenger trains technically going through the diverging route. But otherwise, number 7's here for this somewhat crossover, and then number 7 that will then run off into the yard. And then here, dropping down, there is a little gap between the two layers, the two strips, of that woodland scenic foam track bed, and that brings us down to about 1 1/4 inch track spacing. Around about 1 1/8, 1 1/4 would probably look pretty good. It's still a little bit farther apart than the prototype, but that's fairly common from what I can see. 1 1/8, 1 1/4 mainline track spacing. So I think I'm at the point now where I can start to glue down the track as it comes around the then peninsula out of the station, and again shuffle over that inside track a little bit closer. I don't quite need to be 1 7/8, almost 2 inches. Bring them a little bit closer together. I will also then need to wire up these turnouts ready before we drop them in. At least get them wired and have the dropper wires coming underneath. So yeah, pretty good progress. This is with those two main lines coming around the peninsula, brought in a little bit closer. Did also just make sure that I had the right radius as they went through, just to smooth it out. So I talked about this in a previous video. I have a bunch of different strips of plywood that I measured out for a whole bunch of different radius curves, 18 through about 24 inches kind of starting out. So this is just double check the math, 23-inch radius curve. running around with the track bed, and then it broadens out just a hair to about 24-inch radius. Shuffled over now so that those main lines have that 1.5-inch spacing center to center, and then again when we would drop down to this far side, as you come into Interbay Yard itself, we're down to about 1 1/8, 1 1/4. Did also have Rich double check my math on this idea of the crossover and the idea that, you know, the trains from King Street Station are going to be on that far side track, and so they'll be able to run through, and then the trains on this near side track are what's coming out of Union Street Station, crossing over into the yard, or theoretically crossing over so that this far side track becomes eastbound. Now, did agree that most railroads in the US would do right side running when there's a double track main line, and so in theory I think the near side track would be eastbound and the far side track would be westbound. So somewhat flipping that, in that the far side track is going to be eastbound. Mick from Down Under, who's a subscriber to the channel and often comments, he loves rule number 1 as well. It's my railroad. So that's what we're going to do, at least for here. And again, the logic to it is I want to minimize track work. I need to have a crossover to get trains or locomotives, more so from Union Street Station out into Interbay Yard. Why do I then want to have another crossover to bring trains from King Street Station through another crossover to be able to then do right side running eastbound will be on the near side line? It's a little bit unnecessary. The trains coming out of King Street Station are going to be the more prominent passenger trains that will be running. Things like the Empire Builder, the Western Star, the North Coast Limited, and some of the locals that we're going to say would have gone up and down to Vancouver and even down to Portland. The line coming out of Union Street Station, it's there just because I like Milwaukee Road, Hiawatha, and so I want to be able to run that. And at some point I would like to pretend that I've got the city of Portland and actually came to the city of Seattle from Spokane rather than running down the river. We'll cross that mental bridge when it comes to it. Regardless, I'm okay with limited number of trains and locomotives traversing this crossover, because it means that the primary trains, those Great Northern Pacific trains that are coming out of King Street Station, don't then have to come through a crossover. They've got smooth main line running, and so even though we're technically doing left side running eastbound, westbound on the near side, on the far side of Salmon Bay Bridge we'll have a crossover where it's all single track for the majority of the layout. And then on the north side, I guess, of Salmon Bay Bridge, it splits into main line. And so in theory, I'm going to then make the engineer have a choice. If you're running a train that needs to get into Union Street Station, then technically you're going to switch onto this near side line, other side of Salmon Bay Bridge, because again, I want to minimize crossovers on the far side for the same thing. I don't want to have a bunch of passenger trains having to go through crossovers if they don't have to. This simplifies it for me, simplifies the wiring, reduces the cost. And technically, again, as Rich pointed out, the beauty of CTC controlling all of this is that I could have both of these mainline tracks as westbound if I had 2 trains that were coming into the station. It really wouldn't matter anyway, so I'm okay with the logic of this. I'm now okay with the radius of the curves. I'm okay with the center track spacing. I'm okay with how this looks, then run off into Interbay Yard, and the rest of that track I'm not going to do right now. So I've got some pins left. I think what I'll probably do is pin down a bunch of the sections here for the 2 main lines. They're just going to plow down for a long, long way, feet and feet and feet. So I won't need too many pins, and then figure out how do I then start to swing them around. How far down do I need to go? And then I can glue all of this down. Probably just this one section, glue it down, let it dry, and then come back and be able to do the same with the track. So let's extend down the rest of this track bed for those 2 main lines. This is the 2 main lines laid down that foam road bed. Lost interest in trying to actually pin them down along here because it's a pain in the butt trying to push those pins into the plywood when I have to move it out of the way to glue it anyway. And then down on the end though, it is pinned in because I did kind of measure and figure out best on the track plan where the main lines are going to start to curve away. I do need to build out another section. The end of that number 10 turnout will be right around here, so it's about a foot past where we are, and then I thought I'll probably build a little bit more over as well. I think I'm going to leave that part for now because I've got enough track work here that needs to get done in terms of gluing down all this sub-road bed, getting the track down, getting it wired up. It should be fairly simple. The only cuts that I'm going to be doing are right down where those turnouts are on that south side of Interbay Yard. So I think go ahead and get this glued down, and then probably even start to bring the track down to here, and then wherever I end up at the end of a length of track is kind of where I would then call it a day. And then next step would be kind of build that addition, get that other turnout in place to lead into the yard, and then that should lead us nicely into saying, okay, now we can move on to Sound Bay Bridge. So gluing, I think lots and lots of glue to get all this down, and then once that's done, can look at moving on a track. Alright, this foam track bed is now all glued in place. I've kind of shuffled various different things, weighing things down. So this is the first stuff that's been in place. The wet's been taken off it, all of the track pins is still in place, and coming all the way around, lifted out the area where those turnouts were, but the foam track bed is in place, and then sweeping down all the way down the end. The big long lengths of just very, very straight track bed here as those two main lines would come through, and then pops back out again as we're going to start to swing back together at the end of Interbay Yard. So I'm going to let this glue dry overnight now. Very straightforward, it's just basic white glue. It's enough to adhere it down, but it's also enough that you can still take it back up if you want to. For the track itself, kind of like I did over on the Seattle stations, I'll use more of a adhesive caulk, a little bit of a stronger adhesion than just white glue, but you can use almost any adhesive that you want, that you have on hand. You're really looking for something that isn't going to expand. You don't want it to expand as it dries, because then it's going to shift things and move it. And I like something that if you apply water, you can then still take it back off again if you do want to change anything here, if you do want to then change the track in the future. And the same as I did over on the Seattle stations, I don't actually then glue the turnouts. I'll glue the track either side. The turnout will be kind of held in place. Then when you come in ballast, then the ballast, when the glue on the ballast sets, will hold it in place, so it makes it very, very easy to then take turnouts out if you need to. All you need to do is then just slide out the rail joiners either side, and the whole turnout will lift straight out. Because then you shouldn't really need to replace turnouts, but if you're going to replace something track-wise, it's probably going to end up being a turnout. So we're a long way from actually getting those turnouts ballasted in place anyway. But like I say, I'm going to let all this dry overnight. Then when we come back in the morning, we'll be able to take all of the different weights off, take all the track pins out, have a look at how it is, and then that next step is going to be starting to figure out actually putting some of the track down in place and getting that cut to length. Right, so that foam track bed had dried overnight nicely all the way down to the far end, so you just see it running off into the distance there. I did then start to come and put down some of the track as well. So we got the track in place now from where they would come into the tunnel sections. Now just to kind of future-proof myself, even though on the outside of each of the turnouts were insulated rail joiners, so I could somewhat do block detection along here, do also have insulated rail joiners on here, so that, you know, if we said the tunnel somewhere around here, then I can categorically have track detection that says there is something inside this tunnel, and then I can say there's something on approach to the stations. Again, it's somewhat future-proofing myself. These maybe didn't need to be isolated, but certainly in the tunnel I want to have isolation, so that I can have signals either side. Track's all pinned in place now, fairly straightforward to do this. There really wasn't a whole lot to it. Move through pretty quickly, and then come down to where I have those three sets of turnouts. That will be the crossover from Union Station over onto what we're going to say is the eastbound main line, and then that turnout is where you'll then feed into the yard. So a couple of shorter sections that had to be cut in place. to be able to make that happen, but everything seems like it's fine. I only have about 9 more lengths of track, and I think I've only got 1 more pack of the normal metal rail joiners as well, so I do not have enough track to actually finish all the way down there. So I think what I'll do now is start to do the track feeders for all of these, kind of like I did over on the Seattle station side. Every length of, it's the 30-inch Code 55 Atlas Flex track, so every length of that track will have feeder wires that will drop down. This is on a separate power management unit. Well, it's on the same separate power management unit, the PM42. It's on a separate power sub-district. So underneath, the blue and white DCC comes through. It actually terminates there, and so I think what I'm going to end up doing is the other blue and white that you have coming through is technically the power sub-district from the Seattle stations. And it's not really necessary beyond about here. So what I might do is cut about here, because the last set of feeder wires come in there. I might cut it and then just pull it a little bit further over and kind of say, okay, all of this track as it comes through the tunnel and then drops down to Interbay Yard will be on that separate PM42, just power sub-district PM42, just so that it's separate from the Seattle stations. And so then we could have the tunnel, we can have the main line, probably all the way down towards Sand Bay Bridge, will be on a separate power sub-district, just so that we keep things a little bit separate. What I think will end up happening is that one of the next steps before I actually start to for real get the track in Interbay Yard lined up will end up being another booster on the Digitrack system, another PM42, and we'll have multiple power sub-districts. I'll probably do arrival and departure as separate power sub-districts on the PM42, and then the kind of facilities section will be on a separate power sub-district too. Not so much that I'll have a whole bunch of power draw, but it's the kind of the short circuit detection thing. Like, you know, I don't want a train to short out as it's moving around the facilities area, like the diesel maintenance facility, refueling, something like that, and then have that knock out everything that's moving around in the yard. Or if someone derails, throws a turnout the wrong way or something in one of the yards, I don't want that to knock out running on the main line, stuff like that. So that's more what the power sub-districts are for. It's not really because I'm going to have that many trains running that I'm concerned about power draw. It's really the short circuit detection piece. So yeah, I think start getting the drop wires in place for this track, which means I've now got to carefully take it all out, put the drop wires in, mark out where they are, drill the holes, and then I can start to get all this track glued in place and go ahead and make an order of more track and more rail joiners so that we'll be able to continue on with that at a later date. All of the track now through to the turnouts is wired up underneath and joins into that main DCC bus that runs around. It's not soldered in, but kind of the same as it did in the other one. Just strip away the DCC bus, wrap around the feeder wire 2 or 3 times, turn on the track power, and then kind of test the track sections as they go, and then I'll solder them in. But I've come all the way through, insulated rail joiners like I talked about before, as they would be out at the tunnel area. Come all the way through to kind of where the turnouts are, and that's kind of where I stop. So I do still need to wire these in, and so when I take the turnouts out to wire them in, I'm probably going to swap the ones that are kind of either side of the turnouts for insulated rail joiners, just so that I could have maybe a short detection zone, but I could have some idea of, okay, they have cleared the turnouts for the yard entry, but then, you know, there's something hanging out waiting to go through the tunnel maybe. Did lift a couple of short pieces of this foam underlay, so that's why it's not really setting properly. Need to glue those back down so that they'll set down in place. What I did want to kind of focus in on is what's called super elevation. And so one thing that I didn't do on the curves for the return loop, one, because I was kind of lazy and two, I didn't really care about it as much, was super elevate the curves. So if we look really carefully underneath, what we'll see is that there's little strips of styrene that are kind of on the outside of these rails. If I kind of carefully lift the track up, you can see that there's strips of styrene underneath. There's one, try and move it out a little bit. And so I go with 2-inch strips of styrene. It's actually the first time in N scale that I'm trying to do super elevation. So don't take this as gospel. We'll see how it works. But I have found a number of people doing the same kind of way of doing it. So it's styrene strips, 2 inches long. That's what I'm doing, and you put it on the outside of the rail. So what does super elevation mean? Basically, you're adding some camber to the rail. So as you would come around here, the rail is going to slope a little. It's over exaggerating it. The rail is going to kind of slope into the inside. Idea being that as the train comes round, then the train's going to kind of slope off to the side like that, and so it's not going to tip over onto the outside. It should kind of keep it balanced as it comes around that curve. So it's just the outside rail that we kind of elevate up. And so it's similar to if you'd be driving a car on the road where there's going to be camber on the road, so that as you go around, your car kind of follows the curve of the road, and it's so that rain can run off too. But super elevation is adding camber into it. So to my eye, some people overdo super elevation. They make it a little bit too much. They add a little bit too much camber into it, again, for my tests anyway. They're railroad, they can do whatever they want, and there certainly are a number of photos and videos on the prototype, especially if you look at like more modern motive power, double stack container cars, things like that. Really looks as if the train's leaning over and you're wondering, man, is that thing going to fall over? So there is prototype for doing that. What I want is a fairly subtle kind of lean. Same with the trains to lean just a little bit as they come around. So how do you do that? Well, obviously put the styrene strips up, but you're actually gradiating the styrene strips. So we start out, there's no styrene strips here, and I think just as the curve's kind of starting to come around, there's the first styrene strip, and this is 0.005 of an inch. And so we have because I've got really big broad curve, I've got about 8 inches or so of the 0.05 inch, and then it transitions to somewhere around here. I think it then transitions to 0.01 inch, and again we have another 6 to 8 inches of that. And then so by the time we're really into the curve, it's probably actually a little bit further down, by the time we're really into the curve, then we're at 0.015 of an inch, and that 0.015 of an inch runs most of the way around the curve. And then again we've got 6 inches or so where it transitions back to the 0.01 of an inch, and then another 6 inches or so of the 0.005 of an inch. And then I think that this is 0.03 inches wide, because really all you're wanting is just a little bit that thing kind of sits underneath that outside of the rail, just to elevate it a little bit. So I'm hoping that the 0.05, the 0.10, 0.15 inches adds just enough of that kind of camber, that super elevation as we go around. And so again, it's just the outside rail that you're doing. So in this case, because I've got 2 tracks, double track, it's the outside rail on both of those tracks. So there we go. We'll see what it looks like once it's glued down. That's going to be the next step, is starting to actually get the adhesive down, adhesive caulk that I use, get that down into these sections. Careful as we go around here. What I might end up doing is little dabs of super glue on the styrene onto the rail, and then the adhesive would sit underneath just to make sure that it stays in place and it's going to adhere properly. And then probably make sure that I've got lots and lots of weight on this, because if the inside rail doesn't adhere as well, then you're not really getting the full effect of that super elevation. So lots of weight on this as we come around. Didn't do as much weight when I was doing the curves around over on that return loop, because again, I'm not as concerned about that, although I do reserve the right to come back and add some of this super elevation in if I want to. But in this main scenic area running, where we do have curves at the end of the peninsulas here, I am going to do it. And even though we don't have it on the Interbay Yard section, because it's just going to be one big long stretch section, as we would step over onto this side where we're going to come up along the Puget Sound, start to come up through Everett towards Snohomish, the track is going to gently wind left and right, and so then again we'll have a little bit of that super elevation as we go through. So let's start to glue some of this down, and then once it's done, lift it up and see if all the little cutting and fiddling of getting these little styrene strips in was really worth it. Alright, I promise you there is actually track underneath all of this that is glued down. We do have those styrene strips in place to kind of do that super elevation. Just kind of using a whole mass of things that I could find to weigh it down. Did have to break down and go and raid the pantry upstairs. Irony is I used to drink way too much of this bloody stuff and haven't touched it for a long time now. I actually tried having one a week or two ago and it tasted disgusting. So I don't know if that's progress or not. Kind of miss it. That was some of the earlier stuff that was glued, so no wet on those because it's pretty much down. But around these curves, I do want to make sure that there was plenty of wet all the way around. Again, just to make sure that that super elevation that we put in the gradient around those curves does stay in place. So we'll see how it goes. A little nervous. This part's fine. Back into the flat here, but yeah, I'm a little bit nervous as to how the camber works, not the gradient, how the camber works with that super elevation. Like I say, it should be very, very slight. So even, you know, tomorrow once we come back and take all this wet off and have a look at it, it should be very, very gentle. It shouldn't jump out that there is that camber in place. Do have the track wired up though, so what we'll be able to do once the glue's dried and have the track pins and stuff out that's holding it down is at least run a train around, you know, up to where the turnouts are, but we'll be able to run it around enough on this end cap peninsula here to see if that super elevation has made a difference. So I'm gonna let this dry. I'm not gonna have a drink of that stuff anymore to kind of celebrate. Let it all dry, come back, see how it looks tomorrow. Alright, so I guess the better use for all of that soda was actually to wear down the track because it's worked out pretty well rather than me drinking it. So I do have a train parked up, hanging out just down there. We'll come to that in a minute. All the track is now glued down. The super elevation did work. It is subtle. It's very subtle. It's maybe a little bit too subtle. It is there. It's kind of hard to tell even with your naked eye. I'm going to start to move that train forward though, just so that it starts to make its way around. And so yeah, I think what I had done 0.005, 0.010 and then 0.015 inch on those styrene strips. And so it's there, it's subtle. It is the effect that I was going for. I didn't want it to be too overpowering. Let's see what it's like as it starts to come around, how well it comes out on camera. You can definitely tell it is definitely leaning in like I kind of want it to. And this is where the GoPro is going to get all kind of bad focusy, and so I should probably just switch it over to the other camera. But it is there, it is doing it, honestly. And so quite happy with how it then makes its way around. And so these are then some of the Railsmith cars that I've got come through from Lowell Smith. Some SP&S ones, some sleepers, another couple of SP&S ones. I've actually got I got all three of the sleepers. I got some diners, I got some coaches. So I've got a whole bunch now. I haven't thrown the Northern Pacific cars on the back of this. So yeah, I've run it back and forth across both of the lines, both the inside and the outside line. Ironically, I've kind of brought this train through on what's the line coming from Union Station rather than King Station. But it is there. It is a very subtle lean. Let's see what it's like when it goes backwards. And so it is, you know, the super elevation is working kind of like I wanted it to, but it is maybe a little bit too subtle. But I don't know, overall I kind of like the effect. This would still be a somewhat of a slow speed corner anyway, and so maybe they can say, well, you wouldn't actually have had that much camber on the track, and so maybe this does work out okay. Like I say, it is slight, it is there, it is the effect that I was going for, but I think on the next curves I might try bumping it up to 0.010, 0.15 and 0.20. And kind of see if that makes any difference. I think I'm going to call this video to an end though, because this one's probably getting kind of long. Not really a whole lot of new stuff to show in terms of like time lapses I go through. Previous videos have shown that. Super elevation, I didn't want a video because I wasn't sure if it was going to work out, and it does, but it doesn't. So I think what I might do, like I say, is move up to a little bit more thick styrene strips when I do it next time, and then I'll just go through and do a time lapse. But at least kind of like a proof of concept, the super elevation does work, and you just need to make it a little bit more so that it's a little bit more clear. So next steps are going to be these turnouts. That should be fairly straightforward. It's just 3 turnouts to wire in, get the holes drilled for the point motors as I get to those, and then I need to order a bunch more track. And then this track will be very straightforward. It's just kind of straight line track, but need to order more track for that. Probably some more rail joiners, and then I also need to build a little bit of an extension on the far end there so that I can sweep those tracks back together and add in the turnout for where it'll come through the yard. So save that for the next video. I hope you've enjoyed this one. Please do like, subscribe, follow along, hit that notification bell thing so that when new videos do come out, as they do some more work here, you'll get notified and you can check those out. Let me know what you think. Let me know if you've done super elevated curves and N scale. It's code 55, and so what kind of thicknesses of styrene that you did to kind of build up that curve and go back, because like I say, I think 10, 15, 20, maybe it's even 15, 20, 25. I know that's starting to get almost to HO scale, but yeah, we'll see. I'm maybe just going to try this one more time on one of the other curves and see how it goes. But yeah, let me know if you've got any thoughts on that, and hopefully we'll be back again soon. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.